We'd like to welcome you all to the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking virtual panel series. This series is designed to highlight the artists of the 7th National Collegiate Paper Art Triennial that's sponsored by the North American Hand Papermakers. I'm Jerusha Graham, the museum coordinator, and tonight I'm joined by Ben Iluzada, Elise Hochhalter, and Shoko Nakamura. We are thrilled to hear from these artists who have contributed to a wonderful exhibition. And now to introduce our first panelist. Ben Iluzada is a Philadelphia-based printmaker, papermaker, and book artist who received his MFA in book arts and printmaking from the University of Arts in Philadelphia as their inaugural presidential fellow, and his BFA in printmaking from the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. In 2015, Ben founded Two Step Press, a collaborative printmaking edition studio, which is currently located in Philadelphia, where he has collaborated and printed with many professional artists, including James Sena, Sue Cole, Carrie Moyer, Helen Frank, Mick Bokelman, and many others, through both his own practice and through larger institutions like the University of the Arts, Printmakers Open Forum, and the Brandywine Workshop and Archives. His work can be found in the Met Special Collections, New York, Notre Dame Shishin University Special Collections in Okayama City, Japan, the Toronto Public Library Special Collections in Canada, the Brooklyn Art Library in New York, the Maryland Institute College of Art Special Collections, the University of the Arts Special Collections in Pennsylvania, the University of Wyoming Art Museum Permanent Collection, the Zuckerman Museum of Art in Georgia, and many other public and private collections around the world, including the US, the UK, Australia, the Bahamas, Germany, and the Netherlands. And now you'll hear from Ben Iluzada.
Hello, I'm Ben Iluzada. I'm a papermaker, book artist, and printmaker here in Philadelphia. And I'm going to be talking today about book arts, identity issues, and how to make your paper stock last. So just a short backstory. Jerusha covered most of this, but I was a presidential fellow for the University of the Arts. I graduated in 2019. I was an R&D intern at Frontline Arts, doing papermaking and printmaking facility improvements in Branchburg, New Jersey in 2018. I have my BFA from MICA in 2015. I attended a papermaking workshop in Fabriano, Italy, where I really learned how to make paper for the most part. And then I was apprenticing in Maine with Don Gorvet. And then I have a couple of fun collections. So I really started exploring book arts in high school, doing weird experimental sculptural book arts along with traditional alternative books and traditional hand-bound journals and volumes. And when I was in college, I was studying under Gail Deary with papermaking, primarily printmaking and papermaking, and she really introduced me to the craft of papermaking and encouraged me to take the Fabriano Paper, Book, and Print Intensive with Lynn Schurz in 2012 through Pyramid Atlantic. And that's where I spent a good amount of time, about 2 weeks, just being an extremely intensive papermaker, and I really got a lot better at my craft there. And then when I got back to the States, I really started to refine my approach to what a book was and started playing around with different elements and different traditional methods of bookmaking and how to play with things that were not just a plain codex, things that were just sculptural, more folded artwork. So here are two books that you can see that are just Turkish mat folds and accordions with cutouts and multiple layers and other fun stuff like that. And then I started also doing other structures. So the one on the left, brick by brick, is it's a single sheet book that just folds around in handmade paper. And then the Daibolquera is an altarpiece of prints on wood panels. And it was also a lot of fun just to play with how things could, how a book, quote unquote book, could actually work without text or with text, and how I can use the closing and opening of an altarpiece to kind of say, hey, this could be a book, this couldn't be a book. It's a sculptural object, and that's really something that I think is fun to look at. And And then I started using the structures to really tell a narrative. So during my BFA thesis, actually, I was creating these dice, these structural cubes that people could roll around or play with, that also people could look at it from afar. So you had one regular traditional codex, which was in the Footsteps of Giants, and then you had all of the illustrations. There were 24 illustrations that were lino cuts that were adhered and printed and made into cubes that you could then kind of compile around and create your own narrative structures and change how you see it based on where you were standing. So you could see different parts through negative spaces, through just how it was all together. And actually, it was a really fun experiment and like way to learn and think about three-dimensional space that wasn't just a straight-up book or like a linear narrative 1, 2, 3. And that was actually a lot of fun to work with. And then after I graduated from MICA, I started playing around at Pyramid Atlantic again, and that's really where I thought I would stop making paper because I didn't really think I'd have access to paper making facilities afterwards, and I was just like, hey, it's an expensive process to do, and I won't get more out of this for that. And then I ended up going to graduate school, kind of on a surprise, on a whim. I applied and then got the full tuition inaugural presidential fellowship at the University of the Arts. And I really just took that opportunity and I was like, I'm going to take it, I'm going to go with it and run. So while I was there, I was helping other students, undergrad and graduate, with various coursework. I was helping teach graduate students who had no paper experience because I was one of 2 students that actually had paper experience beforehand. And I also was helping teach and like helping print, helping other students learn how to do more print processes, which was a lot of fun, but that's how that kind of went. And in graduate school, I really got into making paper for editions just because it's too much money to just make and to buy paper for all your books and all your prints and all that jazz. And we had a giant paper lab, so I was able to make a bunch of paper for all sorts of projects. Most of what I was making was just plain, basic white cotton sheets, sometimes flax sheets, sometimes Japanese kozo sheets. But most of it's just cotton rag half stuff, cotton or like second cut blends, some strong sizing, restraint dry it. And I was trying to make them fairly large, like 18 by 24, 17 by 22. I made some that were a bit smaller, like 9 by 10s, 5 by 7s, just depending on what I needed. But I really was just trying to make a bunch of paper because I knew that I could not afford to just keep making paper and using paper at the rate that I was going through grad school and to make books. Like when you have a book that takes a codex of like 10 different sheets, you can't, and you just want to buy that, that's gonna really put a dent into your budget, and that means you get food, you get rent, or you get paper. So strike out 2 of those and make your own paper. And that's when I started, well, I was making paper for my own projects and for my own books. You kind of get these weird but really fun place to start with. This is a book that I made while I was in grad school, Unimo Esparito, which is a series of lithographs, woodcuts, and lino cuts, and some digital imaging on handmade cotton rag paper that I was able to make entirely with materials that I had made by hand, which is a really fun thing to do because you're making your materials, then you're carving them, then you're printing and putting things together. And this was an edition of 5, and it's about 91 inches long. And it's a small book, and it comes in its own clamshell box, but it's that. And on top of making paper, just like plain blank sheets, I was making paper specifically for book structures as they came up. So this book that you see here, The Path of the Serpent, is an lino cut photopolymer plate letterpress with lead type, gold dusting, and woodcuts, all printed on handmade cotton paper again. But each paper that was for this was all handmade specifically for that section of the book, which I really hadn't been doing because I was like, oh, I need to make paper. I need to make enough paper to last for tons of projects. On here, I started deviating and being like, okay, I'm going to make paper for one specific project. I'm going to make a paper just for the snake, or just for like the clouds, just for like the flyleaves and the paste downs, which I hadn't done before because to me that seemed like it was not time and cost effective. Like it wasn't a good use of materials and resources to only make a small batch of paper just for like one project. Because once again, like I was going at this as like, I need to make all this amount of paper that I need to be able to use like indefinitely past grad school or just throughout other projects. Like, I need to be able to make what I'm making last for a long time. But then I decided with kind of this project, I was deciding, hey, I should probably slow down and I should try and make things that are specific for what I need. And that was actually a really big turning point because I hadn't been doing that previously. And that kind of led me to looking at the paper as an object and how those papers could help tell narratives and be stories in themselves. Um, so I began to create papers that had inclusions, that had blowouts, that had other things going for them, that they weren't just plain sheets of blank paper. And so I was really playing around and really enjoying how things looked with photographic inclusions, especially in between abaca sheets of paper. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but abaca is a really, really wonderfully translucent fiber once you've beaten it for a very long time that can it's really brittle. It feels really brittle sometimes, and it has a really wonderful air quality, like a sound component to it. But it really, really was a lot of fun. And so by playing with blowouts, playing with this inclusions, and playing with printing on it, I started making more and more of these items and elements that were using photographs from my father from when he immigrated to the U.S. As a Filipino American, like there was a distinct cutoff and divide that I had not really ever encountered or thought about, just because we were kind of all pushed away from it. But as a first generation, as a son of an immigrant, like there's a distinct cultural shift between the two of us, which I had always kind of ignored. But I started really looking into myself and being really self-reflective, and then talking to my dad about it, about the differences between how he grew up in the Philippines and how I was growing up in the U.S. And so I was really fascinated and enthralled with how different yet somewhat similar our experiences were. And so when I was using these, this is abaca paper, photographic inclusions, and printing on top. I was really playing around with the idea of the Barong Tagalog, which is a traditional Filipino shirt. It's like a dress shirt. It's a very nice translucent, airy, ethereal garment. It's like a very high-class garment for us. Like it's like our equivalent to a suit, basically. But I was using that the abaca paper as like a stand-in for that kind of same translucency, the same kind of quality of the light that it has and the colors that it has. And then the printing is reminiscent of the actual decorative embroidery that Barong Tagalogs have, which was really, really fun for me. And so I was playing with it in terms of like traditional embroidery, like you see on the left-hand image, where it's like a very nice, simple laced lattice work. There's flowers, there's leaves, up into the very more geometric modern ones that you see, like the one right next to it on the right, where it's like a very, very geometric, very just like angular. There's not as many swishes and swirls. That's less representative of like actual creatures or sea animals or flower parts. Just like it's geometry, and that was really fun to play with, like the range of where I could be with that. And then playing with these, I ended up moving on to hand embroidering them on top of the actual embroidery parts, which is also really interesting in my opinion, just because I'm taking this two-dimensional form that I was using as the paper with photographic inclusions, and then sewing through it and creating like a new way of like binding for it, which you could leave as thin or as strict as you wanted, which I thought was really interesting, and I thought really played well with the idea of like a person who is from one culture and partly from another. It's kind of like both distant from the culture, but yet still kind of in it. Because it's like I'm partially like, I have the embroidery kind of down, but like I'm not fully there yet. Because like I'm Filipino American, I'm not actually fully Filipino. I don't have the same shared cultural, like I don't have all the same knowledge that other Filipino Americans might have or people who immigrated might have. Like, I'm not fully like in that culture. I was definitely a part of it and away from it. And then I was playing around and I started cutting more shapes out and trying to fit the barong's patterning, like the actual sewing patterns for it. And so I was still looking more of the paper as an object that I could use to talk about what the culture and what the society that I had not been a part of was, and like what my takes on it were. So I was really interested in trying to like just taking different forms, taking different sewing patterns, using the abaca to recreate them, to add nuance to what I was working with and what I was thinking about, and try and create larger, like actual garments out of them. And then as going from there, I started putting them together instead of just having them just one at a time. I started collaging them together to create narrative elements. So you can't really see it that well from just this one large overarching photograph, but there is text printed along a straight line through this piece, which you can see. I think it's actually in the exhibition. It's a line from Jose Rizal's poem about the Philippines. Jose Rizal is a Filipino poet. There's a bunch of other stuff to unpack here about just the Philippines and the cultural awareness and shifting that happens within it. But for the most part, I'm just talking about the Philippines as it happens and how it goes. It's an entire one of his poems called The Wanderer. And so I was just repurposing that poem, repurposing what was a part of Filipino heritage, like the poetry and the words of someone who's I don't know how to describe how impactful he was to the Filipino culture, but he was very, very important to us. And I was kind of just like trying to say, here's someone that is very important. Here's this notion of wanting to be a member of this community, but no longer being a part of it, because he'd been exiled to Spain for subversive practices. And he was like, I want to be Filipino. I want to be part of this community, but I'm not that anymore. I've been away for too long. And I was like, it really resonated with me because it's like, I want to be Filipino. I want to be part of that community, but I really don't know what that means anymore. And so I was playing with this and using this kind of as a book to tell here's an entire story. I'm using the words of someone far more eloquent than I am, and I'm letting them explain and kind of showing them how I think this progression, all the photographs you see here are photographs that my father had taken, they're of him from when he was in the Philippines. And then some of them are more recent photographs from his last trip to the Philippines. And then we also have in the centerpiece, it's a photograph of his house, of the house that my extended family lives in currently. And it's like, hey, this is kind of where we came from. This is kind of who we are and where we are. And that centerpiece that is where they are now, but I'm not there. All of this is all the photographs, all the people that are missing, they're taken out. That's all him, my dad, my father's family. None of them include me because I don't know. I don't belong there, but I want to. And so after working and thinking on this image, I created another just a Japanese stab binding stitch buckle, which is similar to using paper that I had made previously for a different project, for the larger segments, for embroidery pieces, for large sheets and shirts. And I started just printing and using that. So I was repurposing paper that I had made for something else and trying to make my paper stash last longer. Just trying to extend its use, extend where these things are coming from, extend the images that I'm using and working with and the kinds of things that I see and I'm relating to, and trying to bring them into another context, another element, just so it lasts for more, so I get more mileage out of things. It's monoprints, it's blowouts, monoprints, lino cuts, screen print, and there's some lead type. It's printed in white. It's very, very light and very faint. You can't really see it, but it's all there. And it kind of just speaks, to me, it speaks more about the book and kind of what the book can represent, more so than what the actual book ends up entailing. And then I also was working on repurposing them and creating these larger quadriptychs, sorry. So it's the paper, it's laminated together, it's 5-6 layers deep. I'm reusing things. You might recognize the center two pieces are from that first photograph of the Avid paper that I showed you guys. I'm reusing things, layering them together to creating new images and to create new work. Just because this process is so intense and so laborious, and it's just I need to keep using this. This stuff is a precious commodity to me. I don't have the ability to keep on making more of it, and I knew that. So I wanted to make what I had last as long as possible. And then these are some of the last two things that I'd made, one of them while still in school and one of them almost immediately afterwards, where I'm still playing with. I'm doing pulp painting, I'm doing stenciling, printing on the front and back, digital printing, to create this kind of an idea. From the behind, it's a traditional Barong Tagalog print, but from the front, it's just a Western style T-shirt collar with a logo patch on it. I'm someone who's kind of stuck between these two worlds, and it was really fun to play with that as an idea. And then just another one we're representing from like where my father was, and then put on the lecture. It's cut out images and Africa paper, all of it's handmade. And then I ended up the last thing I was really doing with this kind of body of work was the body of song, which was like a small short prose and production lino cut with a stencil cut out of it. Which was also, once again, on hand paper. I'm reusing that paper that I had been making during grad school because it's paper that was very hard to make and I can't make more of it because I don't have the abilities to. And that was really the last thing that I had done. So it really is like me. I'm trying to look at the book in terms of what this paper can be and like how to reuse it, how to bring it and make it last for longer, and how to make this work with me and what I'm working on further, and how to make this continue. And that really ended up being where I was. Like, I'm stuck in a weird limbo. I don't know if Elise or Shoko can talk about it, but like, I'm after grad school. I have a full-time job. I have no access to equipment to make paper, but I can make prints. That's what I've been doing more often. So that's really just on my end of how things are going. And I'd love to hear from more other people.
Thanks, Ben. I'm sure people will have plenty of questions for you at the end, but we're going to move on now to Elise. So Elise Hochhalter is a North California-based artist and hand paper maker. She holds a BA in creative writing from the University of Southern California and an MFA in book arts from the University of Iowa Center for the Book, where she specialized in papermaking under Tim Barrett. Her writing about bookbinding and the history of the book appears in Suave Mechanicals, Volume 6. She currently works as a librarian in San Francisco.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. Though our popular conceptualization of the book is often constrained by ubiquitous images of black letters on an off-white page, even ebooks have attempted to mimic this quintessential characteristic. Artist books as a genre have proven themselves to be flexible, easily transcending the banality of the mass-produced paperback. This is because the artist has as much control over the material aspects of the book as she wants. Working backwards, this means that the binding style, visual elements, and paper design are all opportunities to interact and communicate with the reader. A quite simplified definition of the book could be an object often containing words and images, typically composed of a flat, two-dimensional writing surface that is transformed into a three-dimensional handheld object. The book offers an almost unlimited material potential, and papermaking is the primary way in which I engage with this potential. But before I do any more theorizing, I will rewind to talk about how I began to think about making this particular book that is featured in the triennial exhibit, Neither This Nor That. According to my copy of the Oxford English Dictionary, which is printed in the world's tiniest type, the word landscape was first introduced to the English lexicon in the early 17th century as a technical term of painters, meaning a picture representing natural inland scenery as distinguished from a sea picture, a portrait, etc. But almost immediately, we see references to the landscape as not only a realistic representation of nature, but as a representation that is situated within the mind of the painter. In 1660, A. Gibson wrote, "As in a curious landscape, oft we see nature, so followed as we think it's she." Though one could easily assume that a landscape painting offers a viewer a fairly literal representation of nature, that assumption denies the complexity of the various ways in which the mind acts upon perceived reality. The painter offers her highly unique impression of a landscape, how she thinks of nature, with areas cast into shadows to make the rest appear more beautiful. When I deconstruct my own thoughts about book composition, I think of the landscape painting as an analog. The book as a communication medium offers the reader an impression of a scene, a vision of relationships between parts. It constructs an environment or an internal landscape. It often represents external spaces, but only so much as they are a reflection of the preoccupations of the mind. In the earliest definition, inland scenery could be another way to refer to the imagination. For those that have not been able to view the triennial exhibit at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking, here are several views of my book, Neither This Nor That. As many in this audience probably know, Japanese-style paper has special qualities that make it a powerful material to work with and to make. Making paper in this style requires patience, practice, and concentration. As a sheet is formed at the vat, it is almost invisible on the screen's surface, but when it's dry, nearly every imperfection in execution is visible. But there is almost nothing that I love more than spending days at the vat, and I knew that I wanted a paper that was light in color, semi-transparent, and that would have a beautiful drape. I spent the late fall and early winter of 2017 making the paper that I would use for the book at the paper production and research facility at the University of Iowa. Making my own paper was fundamental. More important than control over certain characteristics, I believe perhaps superstitiously that there is an invisible thread connecting the technical execution of a craft to the conceptual ground upon which the work is made. That does not mean that one must make their own paper in order to make books. However, had I not made the paper, the final book would have borne little resemblance to the one that you can see in the exhibit. Nearly every conceptual and design choice that I made can be tied to making the paper. Here are some images of the binding that I chose to use. This is a variation on a traditional stab binding, but with a simplified closure that is situated close to the spine of the book. The text block is composed of 25 stacked folios, sheets that have been folded just once, with the fold at the foredge, as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side of this slide. The stabbed sewing binds the loose edges of the stacked paper so that each folded folio becomes one leaf of the book. But rather than having only 2 printing surfaces, as in all Western-style bookbindings, each leaf has 4 printing surfaces. When working with semi-transparent paper, this offers many possibilities. To return to the simplified definition of a book that I gave earlier, the 2-dimensional paper is given a 3-dimensional form. Any book project begins with the accumulation of ideas or information, and mine began with a solar eclipse. I was lucky to be able to witness the solar eclipse that occurred in August of 2017 from my grandmother's backyard in rural Missouri, which happened to be in the path of totality. I was struck by the way in which my experience of time was simultaneously interrupted and accelerated. The animals present felt that confusion too. The cicadas sang at the artificial dusk and dawn just before and after totality. Did the eclipse occur integrated seamlessly into my linear understanding of time, or did it momentarily remove me from that rigid framework of consciousness? Books also have that power, the power to hold time suspended. There are 3 distinct layers of content in my book. First, it traces the path of a total solar eclipse. The center folio represents the moment of totality, and when the pages are turned from right to left, the shadow cast by the moon moves from west to east. The path of the eclipse can also be read in reverse, from left to right. Here is both an early sketch and an example of the center folio dyed with logwood and mordanted with iron to create a representation of darkness. Here you can see how the center folio depicting totality serves to divide the contents of the book. The second layer of content is a collection of symbolic imagery gathered from dreams, experiences, and personal symbology. Open palms, bees, a mushroom cloud, a tooth, a calf. These images are for the most part mirrored throughout the book, as though they are reflected across the center or the 13th folio, the one that depicts totality. In other words, the images that occur on the 12th folio will be mirrored in the 14th, the images of the 11th folio mirrored in the 15th, etc. Here are two corresponding folios on opposite sides of totality. The open palms on both folios are printed on the inside of the folio, or the back of the sheet prior to folding. The bee printed blind and the tooth in black are printed on the outside of the folio, or the front of the sheet prior to folding. You might need to look closely at the image on the right to see the bee. In this image, you can see the texture of the paper against a tide line that is forming in the first of a series of dip dyes. Two wood dyes, logwood and Brazil wood, mordanted with ferrous sulfate or iron, were used to achieve the effect of a landscape that slowly diminishes as the reader moves closer to totality, then gradually returns as the reader moves away from totality. Here is a detail of the corresponding opposite folio when dry, with each successive dip dye complete. The calf is printed on the inside of the bottom layer of the folio, the text printed on the outside of the top layer. Only because of the unique characteristics of the paper was I able to avoid completely obscuring the calf behind layers of dyed paper. The final layer of content in the book is the text, which explores the interdependence of personal history, memory, and dreams in terms of how these elements shape the conscious experience. It is the only element of the book that must be read as the pages move from right to left. Text is printed on the inside and the outside of each sheet, and sometimes across the fold, as you can see in this image on the left-hand side of the slide. The paper and this style of binding collaborate to allow for the shadow of the text on the opposite side of the fold to be just barely visible. Here is an image of a page spread. In raking light, the moon becomes more visible. To return to an earlier point, the book presents the reader with a landscape, a very deliberately constructed experience, and a forced interruption of linear time. The paper, much like a painter's canvas, gives this experience a physical form. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'm still doing quite a lot of thinking about the book. This is from a series of prints on handmade paper titled Reading. And if you're interested in seeing more of my work or starting a conversation with me, please visit my website.
Thank you, Elise. Again, I'm sure we're going to have plenty of questions at the end, but we want to hear from our final panelist. Shoko Nakamura is a Japanese-based artist whose honors include a Caxton Club grant, a conference scholarship for the joint conference between the American Print History Association and the Friends of Darth Hunter, a travel assistance grant from the College Book Arts Association, and 3 fellowships from the University of Iowa Center for the Book. She has exhibited in Nevada, Iowa, Missouri, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Nakamura has worked as a student specialist in conservation for book repair preservation department, a graphic design studio monitor, and research assistant for the University of Iowa Center for the book, as well as student worker for the University of Nevada's Black Rock Press. She holds a BA in drawing with a minor in chemistry from the University of Nevada and the Book Arts MFA from the University of Iowa. And here is Shoko Nakamura.
Thank you, Chair. I am Shoko Nakamura from Japan. Okay. The boundless potential of book arts. This is a part of the theme of this panel. I focused on it in this piece, short books, which is my thesis project. I tried to explore the potential of book arts and found the words to represent the idea of a book, which can also apply to artist books. I like to share some thoughts on books and paper and their relationship to my book. I would also like to share the concept of these short books. First, I like to start from a very basic general idea of a book. When we think of a traditional book, we would imagine books like this, like having a rectangular shape, nice cover, spine, text block, something like that. I think most of you would know what an artist book is. In short, it is the book made by artists. But what is a book in this case? Not all of artist books, traditional book shapes. Why do we regard them as a book? So I have been researching on this, taking book arts classes, visiting special collections, and joining a number of artist books, and realized all books, including artist books, can be covered by the following concepts. A book is a container for information. And so everything containing information can be considered a book. My thesis project is proof that everything, even you, can be a book. I like to explain why the concept can apply to my book and a little more detail of the short book project. It is a main part of my short books project. It takes the shape of a button-down shirt. It is a shirt-shaped blank book. You can wear this book, and it is the first and important step for this book. Back to the concept. A book is a container for information, and so everything containing information can be considered a book. A book is a container for information, and a shirt is a container for a person. I use a shirt as a container. Shirt books is completed when a reader actually wears a shirt book. The person becomes the information. It becomes the book of you, the reader. So at first, I thought it would be enough to make readers think of it as a book, but I worried that some readers might not think so. For these people, I added several more elements to the book. So the first element is the materials for the book. The main material for the book is momigami, made from my handmade paper. Momigami is a kind of traditional Japanese paper texturing technique that gives length, durability, and cloth-like qualities to paper. To make the seat, I use giant paper-making molds with my professor, Barrett, and classmates' help. Some of them dyed indigo. Then I cut the momigami into pieces and sewed them together by hand using binding thread. Like this, using traditional bookmaking materials, such as handmade paper, beeswax binding thread, and binding needles. It simulates a traditional book structure. I have two more pictures here, like giant mold, drying, giant seed, indigo dyed, just showing. Another element is the secret pockets and secret text. The shirt-shaped book contains hidden secret pockets. There are 5 secret pockets to hold secret text in the book. In the cuffs, right and left, the collar, the left chest pocket, and the right side seam inside of the shirt. There is a set of secret text in the components of the project. Secret texts are made to fit the secret pocket. And the reader can put their secret text or their own things in the secret pockets. Probably it's better to be like paper-like thing. The idea of secret text is to help readers realize they are a book. The secret texts are a supporting element, a gesture from me, and a device to facilitate engagement in the piece. Secret texts that are chosen by the readers show their preference or personality, their choice of information. They are a device to make a reader think of and visualize what the book of you is. So to me, the relationship between paper and book is like one between secret text and a shirt-shaped book. It is a very strong supporting element for the book, especially artist books, to be a book. Using paper as the main material for the shirt-shaped book, my book gains persuasive bookness. Okay, I still have a little bit more time. I'd like to show you other component parts of the Shortbook project. Shortbooks has 4 components: a readable shirt-shaped book, a set of secret text, and a repair kit, and the instructions for reading. You already know about the shirt-shaped book and secret text, so next is the repair kit. Because this book is wearable, it is possible the paper material gets damaged. I include the repair kit just in case a reader finds any minor damage, but it is up to the reader whether to repair it or not. The reading instructions explain the components in the Shortbooks project and some tips for how to read the book. Specifications of each Shortbook are also included. Lastly, this project is my interpretation of books and book arts. I hope it resonated with you and chuckled you at least a little. These have been the main goals in making my past works, and I hope this project achieved it as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Shoko. 3 amazing presentations. The work is phenomenal. I wish you all could see the pieces up close and personal. So we're going to open up for questions, but just before we go to questions that may have been posted in the chat, I was curious about your each of your relationship to books prior to discovering book arts. Like when did that awareness happen for you all?
I guess I can start, but before that, I actually wanted to congratulate Elise Hochhalter on becoming the new secretary of NNAHP. So congratulations, Elise. I look forward to hearing from you a lot in the future as a member of that organization. But I first really became and was associating books mostly with like just escapism, honestly, because I was a big avid reader. But I don't know. What about you two?
Oh, thanks, Ben. Yeah, happy to serve. I think so. I've been interested in books for a long time. I studied creative writing in college, and always associated the book with a physical object, with an individual identity. It was never just like one in an edition for me. The books, even in childhood, that I had on my bookshelf were individuals. So in college, I studied creative writing, and I actually started making what I'm sure Tim would call a real dog. I made paper out of magazine pulp and window screens. So I think I started trying to accumulate ideas about the material book on my own, and then discovered book arts a few years later, actually, that I didn't know it existed as a field, but it took me a while. So.
And Shoko?
Yeah, probably the same. It's very hard to remember. But yeah, first I started from like bookbinding classes and, I made many books, visiting special collections and realized like several books I made in the past, oh, it was in the book art. So probably something like that. Did I answer to your question?
Yes.
Okay.
And Ben outlined that he came to paper, like making paper for his prints and for his books. Did you all also come, like, was it the book arts, like the interest in book making first, and then the discovery of paper making, or was it vice versa?
It was vice versa for me, actually. I discovered papermaking first, in undergrad, or I guess technically even before then, when I was like just playing around in high school, I made paper. But I was making paper in undergrad, kind of because of who I end up interacting with. Uh, and I learned how to make paper well before I kind of even got into book arts, as like a field. So to me, it's like make paper for your editions, make paper so you don't have to go buy more paper. Like it's a very down to earth, very realistic, a very physical thing. It's like you need to be able to make work still. Like you're still in school, you have to be making assignments and all that jazz. But if you cannot afford to buy the materials to make those projects, make it yourself.
So I don't want to hog all of the questions. There's questions in our chat. Someone asked Shoko, do you ever wear the shirt books? Are they life size? Do you actually wear
Oh,
them?
yeah, I did. And yes, it is a life-size chart book. And you need to wear it to read the book.
I actually brought this up earlier during our practice session. But Shoko, how did you make the joints articulate? So I tried that at one point when I was making like I made a shirt thing similar, but like it didn't work because I didn't know how to make the joints articulate.
Oh, it's kind of hard to answer, but like probably did I show you the last picture? Like that has like small mock-up image? Maybe
Yes,
not. Yes,
I think you
okay.
did. Yeah, I was in the end of your presentation.
Yeah. So that is my original, ideal shape of my short book, but I realized it's very hard to wear, because paper is not flexible as cloth. So I changed my plan. If I cannot do that, maybe I can make it bigger so that many people can wear it. So that is very large, probably XXXL size.
Oh. So you just got around it by making it much larger than I think your actual body.
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, it is large enough to me, but I'm not sure it's large enough to you. But it is wearable for sure.
And then also in our chat, there was a question for you, Ben. They'd like for you to talk about how you're making your abaca papers, Eastern or Western style formation, aid, sizing for printing, how many hours for the beat. Like they want the technical stuff.
Yeah, okay. I think that was, Jazz,
Yeah.
or whoever pressed that. I can talk about that briefly. So that's translucent abaca. It's overbeaten. It's about 8-hour beat. So you beat it for about an hour, 2 hours, slowly dropping it down to like 4 or 2 on a Hollander beater. I was using a Hollander beater. And then once you're at that, you just let it go for about like another 4 to 6 hours, on like 1 or 2. Uh, and you're really, really beating those fibers down really, really, really hard. Um, I pull them Western style because it's easier on me. I don't use formation aid. Sizing is dependent on what you want. Abaca, once you beat it for that long, it doesn't really matter how you size it or how it works. Like I'm sure actually Tim or Elise or Shoko could speak a bit more on this. Tim might be better at, but once you have it at that range of beating, it doesn't matter really about the sizing because it's gonna just crinkle at any paper, period, or any water. Sorry. So I lightly internally size it, but you don't really need to. Um, Anything else for that? Interested in details for book art, but yeah, if you want to do abaca, you want it to be translucent, you gotta have it like 6 to 8 hours, and then you'll be very careful when you beat it and when you pull it, because it's gonna really, really want to bundle up and ball up. So you got a lot of really annoying knots in your pulp when you're pulling sheets. So you got to be very careful and clean your decals off, clean your mold, and then get nice, clear, crisp sheets. That's how I mostly make abaca. I don't know if Elise or Shoko have a better way of doing it than I do. You probably do.
And did you say Eastern or Western style?
Western. I pull my sheets generally Western sheets. Most of the time, those are on wove molds. I don't like laid molds with abaca because laid molds tend to create those lines, the laid lines, which are normally beautiful and I love them, mostly for cotton sheets. But when you're doing abaca, you want that translucent, smooth sheen for 8-hour beat. So a wove mold is the best option, in my opinion. Once again, I can't speak for Elise or Shoko or anyone else.
And we're coming close to time. I'm gonna throw the last question to you, Elise. You gave us those teasers with your last slide. Can you tell us a little bit more about that work, that body of work that you're starting?
Yeah, I so actually having relatively recently graduating from school and being forced to adapt to life without a well-equipped studio, I adapted pretty well to the shelter-in-place situation that happened pretty early on in March here in San Francisco, and it actually allowed me a lot of time to start thinking about and pursuing projects that have kind of been bubbling in the surface, or bubbling behind the surface of my mind, and that those prints that I showed are from a series of prints and actually a short 4-minute animation that I'm working on, that are made. They're actually cyanotype prints made directly from 35 millimeter film, and yeah, on handmade paper. So I'm pretty excited about it. It's a really fun process.
Well, we'll have to keep an eye on your website to see it progress. So I'm going to close up because we're getting close to time. I do want to give a couple of announcements. Let's see here. So I'd like to thank you all for giving these wonderful talks, and thank everyone that attended and listened to the talk. If you are interested in getting more information, You can go to our website at paper.gatech.edu. And then if you actually want to see the entire exhibition, all of the other works in the show, you can see that on our website as well. If you're interested in seeing additional exhibitions that have been sponsored by the North American Hand Papermakers, you can view those on NorthAmericanHandPapermakers.org.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight.